What's good, everybody? It's your boy Jason4 here, and I know I said I wasn't going to necessarily upload anything until Sunday, but honestly, if I want to take this stuff seriously, especially when it comes to YouTube and everything, I need to just go ahead and just do things. Even though I might not feel like it, I might just need to just go ahead and post something. Even if it's not necessarily edited or some video playing in the background, just have something going versus nothing. Also, if I sound a bit fat, it's because I low-key kinda am. I ain't gonna necessarily lie. Had some Chili's today, and I had the Big Bacon barbecue burger, which, good lord, that was a monster. I'm not necessarily gonna hold you. That grease and meat was just not. That almost murdered me. I'm not necessarily gonna lie. I can understand why Joker suffered through the Big Bang burger. I'm not necessarily gonna hold you. It was definitely not no hub. Also, the fact that I had a slight bit of Patron as well, that broke the hell out of me. That slapped me the hell up. I'm not necessarily gonna lie. I'm not the type of person that can drink a whole bunch of alcohol like that, obviously. But like, jeez. If you was asleep before, that shit will wake you up. But anyway, when it comes down to things, I basically want to quickly just talk about realism in games and basically fantasy games, because honestly, I kind of just figured out what type of player I am when it comes to like certain video games and certain things that I honestly enjoy. And I realized I'm more of a fantasy person that, side with that, honestly. Because like, and don't get me wrong, like there's some games with like realistic stuff and realism in it that is fine, that I can definitely mess with. But there's also some part of it where it's just like, I don't really care for it, because if I'm playing a game, majority of the time I'm playing it because I want to forget about the real world for 10 seconds. That's basically why I enjoy things like Genshin or Kingdom Hearts or Persona or something of the sort, and games of that nature, versus games like The Last of Us or something like that, or like Uncharted, which Uncharted was fine. I liked Uncharted, but I never really, like, I wouldn't say that's like a top 10, top 5 game series to me, And it's also the reason why I could never, like, I guess, couldn't get into Resident Evil, obviously, because like, I see people talk about it all the time, especially with Resident Evil 4, and how people are just loving the crap out of that game, which is good for them. But like, for me, playing that game, or at least, trying it out, even when I was playing like the demo, honestly, it was fun a little bit, but it wasn't like, oh, this is like Oscar-worthy stuff or something like that. It just didn't resonate with that, honestly, with me, especially with them taking it into like a realistic tone and stuff. And cutting down, I guess, on the cheesy ass humor or whatever. And I kind of just didn't really care too much, honestly. Yeah, sure, I watched like a couple playthroughs with people and how they play it, but like, other than that, I didn't really care too much about Resident Evil, and I still don't, honestly. Don't get me wrong, Resident Evil 7 and 8 were good games. Honestly, the Ethan Winters saga was definitely something to be read about, something that I would think everybody should check out. But anything else outside of that, I don't really care too much of, honestly. Like, I don't. If it's not really the Gentile material things, it's not necessarily that, something I'm gonna truly bother with, honestly. Like, and that's like the only things I really see anytime I'm like scrolling, especially on socials, when it comes to like Resident Evil 4. It's just, oh, here's a tasty Ada or Ashley allude, because of course it is. But that's about it, honestly. But honestly, I just don't get excited for those games. But fantasy games, those games are like on a different caliber, I feel like, honestly. Because sometimes they can go a little too fantasy, but sometimes they can always fit just right. And I can always just rely on some of those type of games to kind of like, take me out of the world for 10 seconds and just let me just dive into whatever I want to dive into. Even when it comes to fighting games too. Like, granted, I don't really, judge fighting games on their realism and all that type of stuff, because majority of fighting games ain't really realistic, honestly. But, and sometimes, even the most realistic, like, fighting games with, like, realistic characters, sometimes even those be kind of on the fantasy edge of things, and it doesn't necessarily bother me. But when it comes down to things, I just don't really care for realism in gaming. I just don't. Like I said, I don't want to get reminded of the real world of what I have to deal with and what I have to do. It's like, it just doesn't hit the same with me, honestly. It really just doesn't. And even though, again, some fighting games might get realistic, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's completely diving into realism. Like, yeah, Tekken 8 looks realistic as shit, but that doesn't necessarily mean, it's heavy on that edge of realism, though. Like, you still have crazy ass crap happening, like a walking panda bear coming through and whooping your ass with karate or whatever, or a cute ass Chinese lady that likes to, whoop your ass with her own karate and be friends with that damn panda. Literally demon people. Like, there's a lot of shit that's like super fantasy about it, to the point it doesn't necessarily bother me with it. And honestly, it just made me want to keep playing the game, honestly, a little bit more, because it just seems out there and fun. That's basically kind of how that is, honestly. Skullgirls, very much the same damn boat, honestly. Played that Black Dahlia literally just yesterday. My money, though. But when it comes down to things, she was interesting, honestly. Her story was definitely interesting, too. And I found more interest in their story of her than probably any AAA cinematic realistic game, honestly. That's kind of how I feel, honestly, because Black Dahlia was no hoe. She was just murking people left and right. It didn't make any kind of sense. And then I just learned about the whole history of Skullgirls and how that kind of is, like, not too long ago, I think yesterday, and how things are, and how the world, people want to destroy the world for some reason, and the goddesses can appear in that world, which is crazy, honestly, which deserves a video of its own, honestly, when we talk about it at some point. But it's just like, this is the kind of stuff I just like. I just like the things that just doesn't make any sense, and doesn't necessarily, it isn't something that you can just easily grasp. I like it when, games kind of just dedicate their time to reward you, especially after years and years of playing the game. That's kind of like why I like Kingdom Hearts in some shape and form, because it doesn't change their main character. They never will change their main character. Sora will always be the main person, and that's something I can thoroughly enjoy of it. And that's like one of the big things I honestly really like. Now, there has been moments where like fantasy dived into realism and tried to go a little bit more realistic than they should, and that's kind of the reason why I kind of don't necessarily care for certain aspects of it. Like Final Fantasy, for example. Final Fantasy VII kind of follows that realm of realism to the point I kind of don't care. Much less, people always say the Final Fantasy VII was like the greatest game of all time, which I'm not arguing that it isn't true. I'm not arguing that, but I do think it's overhyped the shit. And I really don't see the point, like, or at least the hype into it, though. Right? I get it's Cloud, I get it's Sephiroth, but other than that, I don't really get the whole hype over it. Especially now played the original Final Fantasy VII like some months ago, and kind of remembering how Remake is, and then kind of seeing their direction with it. I don't necessarily get that hype for it, honestly. Like 15 got me more hyped than, Final Fantasy VII personally. And hell, I can even say that Final Fantasy 13 and 13-2, as crazy and whack and weird and strange as those stories were, I enjoyed those games, I feel like, a bit more than, Final Fantasy 7, personally. Don't get me wrong, there was some moments in 7 that I think that was really good in Remake, especially the Sephiroth boss fight, because Jesus, was that the best boss fight I ever played in the fighting game, not fighting game, but in a game, just period, honestly, in a very long time. The last boss fight that I think that was like super good was Xemnas back in Kingdom Hearts 2 in the OG days. But yeah, outside of that, I don't really care too much for 7, because it just feels like it just teeters on that edge of realism a bit too much, honestly. Or at least that's just me. At least that's just how I kind of feel. And then with like fantasy games, they obviously also have like lessons and stuff that you can kind of learn from it, and kind of have in-depth, deeper characters than any kind of realistic character that you can obviously throw down with. And they don't necessarily try to throw in so much propaganda to the point it hurts the entire show, game, series, or whatever. Unlike, games that we have seen, like The Last of Us Part 2, which that was nonsense. And then, some people might say, oh, the revenge thing was actually kind of good. The, not getting the revenge thing was also really good, but, then you got obviously the bad part of it, which a lot of people don't care for. And it just like, you don't really see stuff like that in fantasy. You do see some of it, You do see some of it, I won't hold you, but there's parts of it where you don't necessarily see it, where it's like a propaganda that just need to be pushed for some reason, and it doesn't necessarily make the player feel bad, honestly. You learn that through a character, and that's like the best thing. And that's kind of like something I can absolutely understand and, enjoy about a character and stuff like that, and why I like story-based single-player games a lot of the time, because, you're going through this whole ass thing with this character, you're enjoying your time with it, the game doesn't make you, hate the character or anything like that, but you're just going through the motions with them, and then you just see where they end up at the end, where it might be a good ending or could be a bad ending, but at the same time you get something. I feel like you get something out of it versus a game with some, like, with realism, honestly. And then most time when it comes to games that are more realistic, they're more cinematic, which means sometimes they're gonna be more times than not you watching the game versus you actually playing it, which is like something I don't necessarily like when it comes to a lot of cinematic games now. Like, the only game I can think of that actually does it well is like God of War Ragnarok, because at least with that one, yeah, you got cutscenes, and yeah, you got like a lot of cinematography type of things, but like at the same time, at least it wasn't like, you're not necessarily doing anything. There's been moments, but there hasn't been like an overdose of those moments, so it's not necessarily horrible. And then there's some games that has a bit of realism and fantasy mixed together into one weird ass thing, and then sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Big example, Saints Row, the reboot of it, that was horrible. They tried way too hard and they just failed completely, and honestly, in a burning fiery inferno. Honestly, it doesn't make any type of sense. GTA 5 though, they did it well. And the thing is about GTA 5, I would say honestly, is that yeah, it's realistic with some stuff, but at the very same time, the characters and the story, for a majority of the points, it never took itself seriously. It never took itself like super duper seriously, where this is like a thing, we have to be serious right here, or something like that. It's like, yeah, let's just have some titties here, let's have some guns here, hustling some drug money over there, and then go back and just start burning someone's house down for some reason. Like, it's not necessarily taking itself too seriously, and that's what I kind of fear over GTA 6, because, with people and how they are now and how sensitive things can be, I'm probably not going to be surprised if GTA gets the Saints Row treatment. Not where the game is horrible and the cast is horrible, but like where they change things, where they used to say things and used to have certain things, and they just don't exist anymore. And because they just censor it, because that's just how people are. And I would not be surprised if that ends up becoming the case of it. But overall, still to the point, realism and fantasy with it, it's still boded pretty damn well, especially with online, how they have like a whole bunch of weird random shit like ray guns and flying cars and whatever. So there's ways you can make it work, but there's often times than not, I would say for me personally, they don't really work out. I would say it's maybe like 50-50 for me personally. And it pains me so damn much too, especially when it comes to fantasy games and how they get like the short end of the stick, whether it's like, the fan service is cut down, or got to be censored in some shape and way, even though literally any realistic character with AAA things don't get this type of treatment, even though they can literally break their own rules of the company that they published the game under. They still don't get necessarily the same shitty treatment like, anime games does, or like fantasy type games does. And it doesn't make any kind of sense. Like, it genuinely doesn't. So it just kind of drives me up a wall just a bit. And then when you see people talk about it and just, be mad at it, it's not like we're trying to just, be endlessly mad at the company or anything like that. We just want some equalness when it comes to things. Like, if you're gonna censor one game and censor it in a way where it shouldn't be censored, then you should carry that out for everything else. Like, if one game can pop up with a nipple, then every other game should be able to, do that. Especially if you have multiple instances of multiple games doing the same damn thing. There's no reason why you can't necessarily do it for, games of the sort when it comes to fantasy and stuff like that. Certain regions might not necessarily let that happen, but certain ones should. I mean, especially if you're going to just let certain ones slide and other ones not, that doesn't necessarily make sense. Like, in hell, I'm even worried about a little bit about Rain Code, honestly. That, detective game that's supposed to be coming out in June. because like they even had like a character in the recent trailer of it where they didn't pop up in the trailer because they were smoking, and they had to censor that and cut that out, and that kind of makes me worried about the English release, and then potentially the future of Danganronpa as a whole if we get another game out of that series, because it's gonna be like, okay, you cut that out in Rain Code, what else other horrifying shit are you going to potentially cut out in Danganronpa when it comes back? So that's like another thing too that kind of stresses me out just a little bit, but at the same time it's like, let's just hope that doesn't, happen, because none of the other games got censored, even though they was raunchy and crazy as hell, but they never got censored to that point. So hopefully, if Dangan comes back in Rain Code when it comes through in June, it hopefully doesn't necessarily break anything. But when it comes down to things, of all the things I've said so far, basically, I just really enjoy fantasy games. I really do. I will pick those any day of the week over a game that is trying to be realistic or, have like a realism tone to it, honestly. It's why I'm not necessarily super interested even in FF16. Mainly because it's just, outside of being medieval and old-timey, it's just a little too realistic for my taste. It just really is. And it just, like, granted, don't get me wrong, some of the things I've seen, obviously, that they release, it looks fun, it looks fine, but also it just doesn't necessarily hit the level of what I'm looking for, honestly. So, it just kind of, it is what it is type of situation. That's why I kind of just like waiting on games like Kingdom Hearts 4 or Lost Soul Aside. Even though it looks realistic, it still has a lot of fantasy elements into it that looks really damn cool. Or Stellar Blade with a big booty Asian chick. I don't know. But when it comes down to things, I'm just interested in fantasy more than realism, and that's just kind of how I am, because that's just kind of how the person I kind of grew up into, honestly. Just enjoying more of those things than anything that resembles the real world, because I absolutely sometimes despise the real world, even though we live in it, but because that's just how it is. But anyway, that's basically all I really wanted to say for this one. Let me know in the comments, what type of gamer are you? Do you like to focus on games that are more like realistic or have realism in it? Do you like fantasy games? Do you like in between games like that? Let me know, because I'm kind of curious about this one, because this one that was like a idea I've been thinking about for like a while now, and I just never really got the chance to say anything about it. But let me know in the comments below so I can actually figure that out, because I'm kind of curious about this one. And yeah, hopefully you did enjoy. If you did, be sure to like, share, subscribe, hit the bell notification on guys. Also, follow me on Twitter if you'd like to donate to the channel. Patreon is available as well. Merch is also a thing too. Please go cop. And also, yeah, until then, it's your boy Jay. Sign off. Have a blessed day.